What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, October 5th, 2016, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday, and another weekend of who knows what they're planning for us this time. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And again, I'm going to ask that you not call in unless you got something to contribute, and because I have a long list of stuff to get through. Quick program note, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 on this Friday. And I know we're all looking forward to that because she's a lot of fun on the radio. I'm going to stop right there. Anyway, last night was the vice presidential debate, and I did start to watch it, and it sort of became very predictable what was going to happen. Once again, we had a moderator that was clearly on the side of Kane. Kane just kept interrupting. He really came across as a bit of a jerk. He seemed to be following this policy of just keep interrupting and never letting Pence get an idea out there. Which is an old high school debate squad tactic, but that's kind of the way they are. And about partway through, I just got fed up with the whole thing. It sort of reminded me of a blind mongoose attacking a paralyzed cobra for all of its entertainment value. And so I switched it off, and I went on over and I watched the new HBO series Westworld. And I know this is not an entertainment site, but this is a great show. They've got another major hit on their hand, like Game of Thrones. And you want to catch that premiere episode first because J.J. Abrams is the executive producer on this thing, and J.J. is always the same thing. If you're not watching from the very beginning, you're going to get confused all the way through. Same thing that we had on Lost. If you missed an episode, you wouldn't know what's going on. So it's a really good show, and Claire and I both enjoyed it. May not be appropriate for smaller children. There's a lot of nudity in there, which of course is thrilling for me and also for Claire, and you'll understand what I mean when you tune that in. So that's Westworld, and I'm going to give them this plug, even though I'm not in the business of plugging TV shows, but it's a real good one. So the vice presidential debates are over. Mike Pence did savage Tim Kaine on his failure as a governor, leaving Virginia about $2 billion in the hole, which seems to be a consistent artifact of any Democratic administration. Deeper in debt. We'll be talking about that later on because it's now official. We added a huge amount to the debt this last year at the federal level. So the polls are already coming on out. The online polls are out there and consistently showing that Pence won this debate. Our own online poll here at WhatReallyHappened.com. Pence got 97% of the votes. And that is very, very intense. At this point, I don't expect it's going to change the election very much because, after all, the election riggers don't bother watching the polls. Why should they? And we're now getting word earlier today the Israeli Navy did commandeer the women's boat to Gaza. They captured it in international waters. And the current whereabouts of the crew are unknown. All communication has been cut off. And the boat is being towed to Ashdod. And, you know, Israel, you got to be a real manly man to whoop on a boat full of girls trying to bring humanitarian relief to the Palestinians that you whoop on to make yourself feel like you're manly men. Little nod of thanks to Ron White for that concept. Ann Wright, who actually lives here on Oahu, was on the boat, and she pre-recorded a tape to be released if their boat was seized, and that's up at the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. Just an amazing lady, amazing background, very courageous, and she's hammering home the point. Once again, Israel seized this boat in international waters. That's an act of piracy. Israel's behaving like criminals. And as usual, the American corporate media, Israel has a right to defend itself from this boat full of little old ladies who are bringing these crayons of mass destruction to the children of Gaza. And the other day when they were talking about this story about how Joseph Mengele liked to whistle Mozart when he was selecting people for the gas ovens things that they had supposedly in Germany. And I said, when the media starts wagging Nazis at you, Israel's going to do something really, really tacky, and along with seizing the boat, Israel is now bombing Gaza again because a single bottle rocket flew into Israel and, as usual, hit a dirt lot. No dent. And Israel's bombing Gaza yet again. We're going to grab a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike.
Hi.
Mike Pence, he kind of turned my stomach when he says Russia invaded Ukraine and Putin's short. He's a dictator. And they're pushing a no-fly zone, Mike. I'm telling you, these people are insane.
They are insane, and I think one of the reasons I got turned off watching the debate is I'm seeing up there arguing over what they think the American people have been convinced to believe rather than dealing with the reality of what's going on. And I wish we had somebody in our political system somewhere with the courage to stand up and say, look, you've been lied to, here's what's really going on. Of course, people like that tend to wind up dead in Fort Marcy Park.
You see, if they can't tell people that we were behind the coup in the Ukraine, because that destroys their narrative of why Russia, was supporting, Yanukovych and stuff, because he was doing the trade deals. They don't want you to get in that kind of discussion,
No, they don't want to get in that discussion at all. I mean, anytime I go online to the discussion groups on corporate media or a YouTube or whatever, and I'll say, look, Russia didn't steal Crimea. There were referendums, and of course I'll get piled on by all the paid shills saying, oh, the referendums were complete fraud. Putin stole those things. They had Diebold voting machines, and they just go on and on and on, trying to win through intimidation, abuse, and sheer volume. But again, people, when they see that, they recognize it. Propaganda only works if the targeted population doesn't know they're being propagandized. But the American people know it. The government's even admitted it. They changed the law to say it is now legal for us to lie to you with your own money, and if you're a loyal American, you will believe the bovine excrement we're flinging at you with a snowblower. And the American people aren't going to do that. The American people, like people all around the world, want to find out what's really going on, just like the people in the former Soviet Union. And they'll use fax machines if they have to do that. And that's what brought down the Soviet Union. And so they're out there just trying to prop up this Gordian knot of lies, fraud, and deception with which they've been ruling us for the last 50 years, if not longer. And it's definitely coming apart.
And, Mike, I just want to let people know, in case they don't know this, Russia is doing a 40 million citizen drill, which has never been done before in the history of the world. So they know where this is going. It's just I hope the American people, a percentage of them start to wake up. Because, when both sides are on TV saying this crap, it ain't going to help, what I mean?
Well, okay, let me cut you off here right now. First of all, Putin is sending a message, and it's a very clear one. And by the way, we have listeners in Russia who have written to me and said that they're in this thing. They've been asked to go through the exercise and the drill. Putin is sending a message that Russia is better prepared to deal with a nuclear attack than the U.S. is. And that's absolutely right. I mean, America's civil defense system that was all built up during the Cold War of the 1950s has been allowed to rot. If you go down into those designated shelters, those crates of food expired years ago. They're full of rats and insects. It hasn't been maintained. The only preparation for nuclear war that the U.S. government has been doing is to protect the government itself, and the rest of you are just out of luck.
Yeah, you'll have about 10 minutes, if that. The time you get in your car, it's over.
Yeah, well, certainly where we live, we're keeping an eye out on that harbor. We figure if all the ships, head to that channel to get out in the ocean, that'll give us about maybe 40 minutes to at least try and get to the north part of the island. And then if it's China that's attacking, even though that's not going to be safe enough, it's a very dangerous time. Dustin, going to let you go. Going to get back to the news here. Now, Nigel Farage is offering advice to Donald Trump about the coming debate with Hillary Clinton, and that is to just not swing at the mud ball she's throwing and just laugh her off, because after all, being lectured on morality and ethics by a Clinton is like being taught safe sex by an HIV-infected prostitute. And that's exactly right. I mean, the hypocrisy is just absolutely stunning. And that's all Hillary can do, is go on the attack. She's losing on the issues. Right now, she's struggling to just get close enough to Donald Trump where the election can be stolen without everybody knowing that it was stolen. Good luck on that one. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Bob in Las Vegas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello there, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
I'm just fed up. I'm fed up.
Join the
I'm
crowd.
Angry. I read an article today on RT, and this is a quote from an official in Washington saying, quote, "The CIA and the Joint Staff have said that the fall of Aleppo would undermine America's counterterrorism goals in Syria," unquote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got a lot of that stuff coming on up there. That's not what's being undermined. What's being undermined is this U.S. agenda to conquer all the world's resource-rich areas and shackle them back to the U.S. dollar, because that's the only thing holding up the dollar right now.
Right. No, I agree with you. But it's getting, by the day, it's getting scarier and scarier. And
it is.
The corporate mainstream media is just, they're distracting us with stories about
Kim Kardashian.
Kim Kardashian and her jewels, and Kaepernick not standing for the national anthem, stories that are trivial and do not impact us at all. And this is what we're hearing from them. Mike, I'll just say this, and then I'll let you go. If you recall back in the days when the PRI in Mexico ruled for 70 years uninterrupted, it was called the perfect dictatorship. That's wrong. We have the perfect dictatorship in the U.S. You have two parties that are identical, and you have a corporate mainstream media that only reports what it's told to report. And they distract us, and they divert us, and they manipulate and lie to us, and that's what we have today. We have the perfect dictatorship in the United States.
No, we don't, and I'll tell you why. Because the perfect dictatorship is one in which the people don't realize they're living in a dictatorship, where they still think they're in control of the government through the election process and so forth and so on. And the U.S. government had that a couple of decades ago, but they don't have it right now. Polls are showing consistently the American people do not trust the election system. They don't trust the government. They don't trust the corporate media. They are waking up. And as we keep saying, and we have a coffee mug that you can get over at the store about this, the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it. And that's where we've got the U.S. government right now, where they're just, they're killing witnesses, and they're dropping bombs, and they're torturing people, and they're issuing threats. They're going to take away the Second Amendment. They're going to take away the First Amendment. And they don't seem to realize that every time we provoke another response like that, they're only shortening their own life expectancy politically.
Well, I hope you're right, but I talk to a lot of people out, when I'm going shopping, and I reference your name. I tell them you should listen to this guy. Mm-hmm. He's the best on the radio. But the people I talk to, it just seems like most people, 8 out of 10, are just in la-la land. They say... Well,
you live in Las Vegas, don't you? I don't think Las Vegas is a representative sample of the average American. Well, and I say that having worked in Las Vegas myself as an entertainer many years ago.
Well, a lot of the people are from other states, but, they'll come out with things like Putin's a communist, the Russians are going to invade Eastern Europe, and it's very frustrating. And I don't know what to do. I'm at my wit's end with these.
Again, you're in Las Vegas. You've got people who are coming on in to gamble and avail themselves of the various pleasures of the place. These are people whose lives are working very, very well. And when you have people who've got the money to go to Las Vegas and be on vacations and everything, they don't want anything to rock that boat. But again, they still represent a highly filtered minority of the American people. And it is a minority. Like I said, the polls are showing trust in Congress is at an all-time historic low. Trust in the corporate media is at an all-time historic low. They're worried about us. They're worried about hanging on to power. And unfortunately, they are feeling cornered. They're feeling desperate, and desperate people will take desperate chances. And one mistake, and we could really be in a shooting nuclear war.
Can I just say one other thing? One thing regarding the economy. If there is a financial collapse before the election, I think that will aid Hillary Clinton, because I think most people will then demand and seek out bigger government.
No, they won't. No, they won't. They won't, because Hillary's campaign has been saying all along, the economy's just fine. The economy's just fine. And Hillary Clinton represents a continuation of the Obama policies, which, while not solely responsible for the economic decline, certainly did not help in matters at all. I think an economic crash is going to benefit Donald Trump a lot more. And I'm going to get into that aspect of it just a little bit further into the show. But right now we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. All right, and we're going to get back to the news here. Got a lot of stuff to get through. Now, Hillary Clinton had a rally up in Akron, Ohio, and New York Times reporter Amy Chozick actually posted a photo on Twitter Monday evening from the rally, showing that the press pen, the area set up for the corporate media, was virtually empty. And she was out there saying, you know, the corporate media doesn't even want to show up at Hillary's campaign rallies anymore. And maybe that's because then they'd have to take pictures, which would show that hardly anybody is showing up at the rallies in general. Donald Trump is pulling 10-1 over Hillary Clinton's rallies, and that's a minimum. I've heard even higher estimates from that. Now, Hillary herself has now canceled all appearances with Bernie Sanders after Bernie Sanders came on out and said that the comment about the basement dwellers bothered him. Well, it bothered a lot of people. And here's Hillary Clinton with this idea, how dare you criticize and question the Empress? We are not amused. Remove yourself from my site and my campaign. And that's not going to win her any more votes from Bernie Sanders supporters here. Now, after all the brouhaha about Donald Trump not paying taxes, which was all done legally because they had $1 billion loss, all of a sudden everybody's starting to look at tax issues, and the Clinton Foundation once again has had to refile 3 years of missing tax forms because they failed to disclose donors. And this is not the first time they've had to do that. It had to do it previously, again, because they didn't disclose foreign donations. So the Clinton Foundation is not in the clear on that one. By the way, Hillary Clinton is out there talking about what kind of a business genius loses $1 billion. Okay, well, what kind of a Secretary of State loses $6 billion, an embassy, and 4 personnel, and 33,000 emails, and a couple of laptops and a BlackBerry? I mean, let's keep things in perspective here. Now then, interesting little article came out at 100%fedup.com. I love that name. The top 10 corporate tax dodgers in the United States are all Hillary Clinton donors. General Electric, Boeing, Verizon, Bank of America, Citigroup, Pfizer, FedEx, Honeywell, Merck, Corning. And by the way, have you noticed that the Wall Street billionaires, who you would think would feel a kinship with Donald Trump, seem to be very much afraid of him, and they're all supporting Hillary Clinton? Why? Look at all the fraud that's been going on. Wells Fargo, J.P. Morgan, Deutsche Bank, they're all keeping themselves rich through fraud and corruption, and they understand if Donald Trump comes on in, he will not be giving them out get-out-of-jail-free cards. They're all pouring this money all over Hillary Clinton because she will make sure that her attorney general doesn't bother prosecuting those bankers, because those poor bankers have suffered enough. Really, they didn't mean to do wrong. It just sort of happened that they wound up taking, billions from their depositors and investors and employees and putting it in their own pocket. These things happen all the time. Haven't you ever found lint in your pocket? Well, it's kind of the same thing on a larger scale. So, anyway. Odd little exchange came out of the congressional hearings. They were talking to the Inspector General of the Office of Defense Intelligence, and he was asked by Chavez about emails Hillary had on her server. Would he supply them to the Congressional Committee? When we come back from this commercial, I will give you this very, very bizarre answer. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this bizarre exchange between the Inspector General of the Office of Defense Intelligence and Chavez looking about Hillary's email. And this IG is asked about the emails Hillary had on her server from the Office of Defense Intelligence, and would the IG supply copies of them to the Congressional Committee? And the IG said, no, they're ORCON, originator controlled, which means he would need to get permission from the originating agency before handing him over to Congress. So Chaffetz asked him, what agency is this? And the Inspector General says, I can't tell you. Now, call me silly. I thought the civilian government was supposed to be in control. And so what this IG basically said is, I can't give you the documents until I get the permission of the agency, and I can't tell you what agency. It's another stonewall here. Now, as you know, while Julian Assange got all this media attention for promising new information on Hillary and then delivering absolutely nothing, the corporate media is ignoring this latest leak by Guccifer 2.0. They're trying to just pretend it doesn't exist, and there's a lot of damaging information in there, and it falls to us, the independent media, and that means you, to copy this information off and send it to everybody that you know. Because there's a lot of stuff in there. And it's very obvious. The media gave Assange all this coverage for he failed to deliver anything about Hillary. See, Hillary's sweetness and light and didn't do anything because the great Julian Assange couldn't find anything. And then this stuff comes out from the Clinton Foundation, and the media is just absolutely silent. Now, the Clinton campaign, all they're saying is they are unaware that there has been a breach at the computers at the Clinton Foundation. Well, really good hackers don't leave any trails behind them, remember? Got all those NSA backdoors built into all the modern computers that the hackers can exploit. And by the way, Guccifer 2.0 is saying the Clintons have never been known for really worrying about computer security, and it was actually very easy to get on in there. So information that's come on out was this mega donor list, more pay for play. And the real big one that every American ought to be just furious about. Top Democrats were getting campaign donations and PAC donations from the big banks that were getting the TARP funds. Remember that picture of all the people who were behind TARP, and they're laughing their heads off that it passed? They were cashing in big time at your expense. Congress repeals Glass-Steagall. The banks go on a rampage. They wreck the economy. They need a taxpayer bailout. Congress takes your money and gives it to the banks, but the banks kick a little bit of it back. You should think about that one for a while. It's just another way for members of Congress to steal from you and try and convince you it's for your own good. Now, Hillary Clinton is now out there saying she doesn't recall making any jokes about droning Julian Assange. This from the lady who claims she remembers everything Donald Trump has ever said. And yet in her FBI interview said, I don't recall over 100 times. There's something going on with that. And she may be mincing words because the context in which this was first reported is that she wasn't joking. Her staff thought she was joking, and they all started laughing, and then the laughter peters out because they're looking at her face and realizing this is a serious question. Now, we reported on this yesterday, but it's worth mentioning yet again. Obama's Department of Justice, Loretta Lynch, has dropped all charges against a Libyan arms dealer who was selling arms to terrorists. And they dropped the charges because taking them into court would expose Obama and Hillary Clinton's role in arming the terrorists in Syria, which we already know they've done through various other exposés, but they're trying to make that go away before the election. So they're going to let this arms dealer off the hook. And speaking of getting off the hook, a federal judge has officially denied a Freedom of Information Act request from Judicial Watch seeking the draft of Hillary Clinton's Whitewater indictment. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, there's an interesting story. This is out of the Daily Mail over in Great Britain, and it's reporting that Obama was so worried about Hillary's health going into this campaign, he actually arranged a secret medical checkup for her at Walter Reed, but she refused instead choosing to go with her own doctor, who then wrote a letter saying she's fine, she's absolutely fine. What's really interesting is that, according to the Daily Mail, Hillary Clinton is suffering from arrhythmia, which is an abnormal heartbeat, a leaking heart valve, chronic low blood pressure, insufficient blood flow, a tendency to form life-threatening blood clots, and apparently she is suffering major side effects from the multiplicity of medications that she's currently on. And that doesn't rule out the concerns about Parkinson's either. Now, one of the best articles that came on out, and this was over at freedomisknowledge.com, and it asks very simply, who is Donald Trump? And then it says, a better question is, what is Donald Trump? And the answer is, Donald Trump is a giant middle finger from average Americans to the political and media establishment. And yes, that's exactly what is behind his success. And that's why the Clinton campaign is not getting any traction with their character attacks and mudslinging. We don't care what Donald Trump himself is. We are just sick and tired of this entrenched narcocracy. We want it gone. It was like I was saying earlier in the year until I got that irate phone call from Japan. If next month's ballot is Hillary Clinton and Godzilla, Godzilla gets my vote for president. Which I thought I was paying him a compliment, but some of the people in Japan didn't see it that way. Now, out in Nevada, there's been a lawsuit, an investigation actually, by Davis County Attorney Troy Rawlings, who's been investigating former Utah Attorney General Mark Shurtleff over allegations of bribery regarding the legalization of online poker. And apparently there was some money laundering going on with the processing of payments to these companies. And now the investigation has expanded to include Harry Reid, then the Senate Majority Leader, who apparently received payments in exchange for his support to legalize online poker. It's like I keep telling you, don't start asking which politicians are corrupt. They all are. The non-corrupt ones have been ejected. Dr. Ron Paul, Cindy Sheehan, they've all been handed their hat and shown the door. The moral and the immoral are mutually exclusive societies. Neither one tolerates the presence of the other. And what that means is when the government goes bad, it goes all the way bad. That's what we're seeing right now. So let's turn over to the war zones because things are getting very, very ugly. And right now we are seeing from a multiplicity of sources that the U.S. is considering direct military strikes on Syrian government forces. And the options under consideration by the U.S. government include bombing Syrian Air Force runways with cruise missiles and other long-range weapons. They're saying the idea is supported by the CIA and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and how they're going to get around doing this without a United Nations Security Council resolution is to carry out the strikes covertly without public acknowledgement. So don't tell anybody, okay? Because when things start blowing up in Syria, the U.S.'s official position is going to be, we don't know where it's coming from. We have no idea. Somebody obviously copied off our design of the Tomahawk cruise missile and they were attacking, which had to be Iran. Iran's been copying all of our weapons. That's what they're actually considering doing, is waging an unacknowledged outright military war against Syria. Now, according to Fars News, the U.S. military is building a new air base in the oil-rich region north of Syria. Now, this is inside Syria they're talking about, near a major oil and gas field, supposedly so that they can get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And this is an announcement by the Syrian Democratic Forces that the U.S. is doing this. Now, a couple points of clarification. First of all, the Syrian Democratic Forces are not Syrian. They are an alliance of Kurdish, Arab, Assyrian, Armenian, Turkmen, and Circassian. And despite the official sounding name, they are not part of Syria's military. They're one of the moderate U.S.-backed, U.S.-directed groups fighting against Bashar al-Assad. Second point of clarification, the United States does not have Syria's permission to build an airbase inside Syria. They're just going to go off and do it because the U.S. can do this. We're on the side of goodness and righteousness and so forth and so on. And it looks like the war against Syria is already underway. Apparently, U.S.-led coalition aircraft have done a bombing across the Aleppo countryside, killing dozens of civilians in the village of Thelfan. And I have absolutely no doubt the corporate media is going to say this was all done by Bashar al-Assad. Assad is bombing his own people. We're not doing anything. Meanwhile, Bashar al-Assad has come on out and said basically that the U.S. is trying to enforce global dominance by unleashing war on countries who refuse. And he's absolutely right. And Assad is saying the U.S. meddling right now is attempting to save what's left from its fading global preeminence, and he's right there as well. The U.S. plan to completely conquer the world, came out of that Project for the New American Century, has failed. And now the fight is to consolidate and control what they have and not lose any more of these countries back to the control of their own people. Story coming out of Fars News also, Russia ready to confront U.S. Plan B in Syria. All this talk about Plan B. And we're seeing Plan B come on out in Russia today, where the U.S. is seriously considering covert strikes on Assad to prevent the fall of Aleppo. And again, look at the bias. Aleppo isn't falling. Aleppo fell to the terrorists. Syria's government is taking it back. Remember how we all lionized Abraham Lincoln for bringing the Confederacy back in? Isn't that what Assad is doing with Aleppo? So they're talking about direct decapitation strikes against Bashar al-Assad. And I think the concern there is like JASTA, this is going to set a precedent that will come back to haunt the U.S. itself. Now, for those who don't remember, JASTA is that brain-dead law they passed to allow the families of the 9/11 victims to sue Saudi Arabia based on a judge simply believing that Saudi Arabia was behind 9/11 and setting the precedent that sovereign immunity of nations no longer applies in the case of war or terror. And then the first thing that happens, Iraq sues the United States for invading on the basis of the lies about weapons of mass destruction. So you start going on out and directly targeting the head of state of another country, and that sets a dangerous precedent. Now, over in Syria again, there are reports that al-Sham are planning to launch chemical weapons attacks against the civilians in Aleppo in order to frame Bashar al-Assad. They are getting desperate if they're going back to this, because the last two times they've tried it, it's blown up in their face. Remember when they launched the sarin gas attacks and said, oh, it had to be Assad. Assad is doing. The U.S. would never use chemical weapons against their own people, forgetting what happened over there in Waco, Texas. And the one thing they could never come up with was a motive for Bashar al-Assad to use a banned chemical weapon against his own Alawite supporters, virtually in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors on the very day they arrived. Nobody could come up with a motive. That was the part that should have been there and wasn't. That was the part that told us this was all a lie. And the UN chemical weapons inspectors eventually concluded, yes, the gas attack was from the U.S.-backed rebels to frame Bashar al-Assad. Now, here's where it gets very interesting, because we all know how reckless the U.S. attack on Syria's military in Deir ez-Zor was. Went on for an hour. The U.S. is still officially saying it was just an accident. You people are just being so picky over the fact that we bombed your troops and your tanks and your other equipment. Come on, cut us a little slack, people. Now, this attack on the Syrian forces was meant to blunt progress of the Syrian forces into the ISIS stronghold in Abud Hills. And the Syrian forces have succeeded in taking that stronghold. And what they found in there is chemical weapons equipment that ISIS was planning to use against the Syrian people to blame Assad. And that strikes me as probably the main reason the U.S. escalated the situation by attacking Syria's military last month. It completely undermines this idea that only Assad has chemical weapons, even though Putin negotiated the deal where Assad gave them up. Just like Saddam Hussein gave up his chemical and biological weapons, and it still didn't save him from being invaded. And I think one of the concerns there is that some of this chemical weapons equipment might track back to sources which are, to put it delicately, embarrassing for the U.S. government. Now, the Russians have delivered S-300 air defense batteries to Syria. One of them has already gone into operation around the Tartus base, according to Russia's defense ministry. And the defense minister commented, it seems very strange why the U.S. is so upset that Russia has sent air defense batteries to Syria. One would almost think that the U.S. was actually planning to bomb Tartus. Now, the Russian Army general is out there saying that Americans do have a good reason to be afraid of the S-300. It is very capable. It is very potent. It's not just for show like the American Patriot. Remember when they rolled the Patriot out during the war in Iraq? And they were saying it's got a 90% success rate. And then after it was all over, they said, well, actually, no, it was more like 50%. And other experts said it was even lower than that. Like most other recently produced American weapon systems, very expensive, looks wonderful sitting there at the military shows, but once it's actually put into the field, not very good. Same thing with Israel's Iron Dome. They have to shoot off 10, 20 of the Iron Dome missiles to intercept one incoming rocket. The S-300 seems to really do the job. Now, very embarrassing leak came out of the United Nations. There was an internal UN report that the public was never supposed to ever see. It got leaked onto the web, in which the United Nations is slamming Great Britain and the United States for their role in the Syrian crisis. They all know what started this. It wasn't Assad. It was the U.S., because they had this grand plan, which General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on back in 2005, that the U.S. plan was to conquer or regime change all of the oil-producing nations of the Middle East and force them to sell their oil only for the U.S. dollar, to keep the dollar in hegemonic domination of the global economy. And it's all falling apart. It's all falling apart. And I think the final blow, hopefully, that'll throw some cold water on all of this foolishness. NATO has come on out and announced through their Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, NATO will not take part in any U.S. unilateral combat operations in Syria or Iraq. NATO basically just told the U.S., you're on your own. And Europe has just basically told the United States, if you want to have a world war, you find someplace else to fight it, because we got the first two fought on our real estate, and two is enough. Thank you very much. Now, as you know, the Russian embassy in Damascus came under mortar attack earlier in the week. Russia attempted to file a formal statement of opposition at the UN Security Council, and the U.S. moved to block it by demanding all sorts of other statements be added to it to dilute the whole point of it and make it too confusing. And now Russia's coming on back and saying they're condemning the decision to block the statement regarding the shelling of the Russian embassy. Now remember, the presidency of the Security Council rotates among the permanent members, and it just became Russia's turn. That is going to shift the dynamic. And Russia has already said their first priority, as in the presidency of the Security Council, is to calm down the situation in Syria one way or another. We're seeing a report that's coming on out from TASS, where Russian diplomats here in the United States of America are reporting they're being harassed by American intelligence services. They're being followed openly and overtly. These spooks want the Russians to know they're being followed. They're receiving threats to their health of family members. This goes against every basic tenet of international diplomacy. Those diplomats are merely representatives of that foreign government. And in this day of instant global communications, none of them have plenipotentiary powers. So the U.S. is basically expressing its anger with Russia by sticking their tongue out at the messengers. That's basically how they're behaving. Sergei Lavrov was out there saying that the U.S. representatives, Samantha Power especially, they're not behaving like adults, they're behaving like children, and he's absolutely right. Now, there's another article that came on out from Ron Paul talking about this large public relations firm that has been given vast amounts of U.S. tax dollars to organize propaganda in support of regime change. Apparently, they're tangled up with the white helmets. And the lesson to take away from that is even in these hard economic times, lying to the American people is still a highly profitable business under this U.S. government. Because that's what public relations is. You're paid professional liars. You know, at least in advertising, you think you're selling a good product. Public relations people know they're not. So we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Hello, I'm America. Welcome back to the show here. So before we went to the break, we were talking about this massive PR campaign to convince you that we need to regime change Syria. And remember, before that was the report that the Pentagon has spent vast sums of money to lie to you, the American people, to support the war agenda. We have a government that takes your money away from you and spends it to lie to you. Now, that's an important thing to keep in mind because nowhere in the Constitution is the government authorized to lie to the people for whom they supposedly work and answer to. And the 10th Amendment prohibits them from assuming that. Now, we all understand the importance of keeping military secrets, but propagandizing the American people is something else. There used to be laws that made that illegal. And those laws were rescinded. And they openly admitted, the laws are rescinded, it is now legal for us to do propaganda on you. And you will believe the propaganda if you're loyal American citizens. So anyway, experts have been looking at the aftermath of the attack on the UN aid convoy in Syria, which is still being blamed on Russia by all the American politicians and corporate media. And the experts are looking at it and saying, they're not even really convinced a real attack took place. That it seems to be staged. The holes that were in the vehicles were already rusty. There was certainly no sign of any kind of blast damage to the road surface or the surrounding walls, and most of that cargo was untouched and still available for distribution. And remember, at that particular point in time, the United States was looking for political cover for having bombed the Syrian forces just the day before. Whose side is the U.S. on? It's a very important question. The U.S., of course, is over in Iraq, aiding the Iraqi government against ISIS, and once again, U.S. forces have bombed Iraq's pro-government fighters. They killed at least 20 of them. And I'm sure we're going to see a phone call going from, Obama over to the head of Iraq saying, really, we're on your side, honest. I just don't understand why these mistakes keep happening. We have the same problem over in Syria. We keep aiming for ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but we keep hitting our supposed allies. I have no idea how this happens. So, getting on to this situation. We actually have a phone call. Karen in Maryland, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello there, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Great, okay. This is my question for you. Is it possible, what is the likelihood that a WikiLeaks leak was done by other than WikiLeaks? What is the likelihood that WikiLeaks just passed it on to another press outlet or to another reporter for distribution and dissemination, and it didn't come directly from WikiLeaks itself?
No, pardon me, excuse me. Hang on a second. We got to take a break here for top of the hour. I got to clear my throat out. Stay on the line, Karen. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, responding to Karen in Maryland, no, WikiLeaks did not release anything through third parties. Julian Assange loves the limelight a little too much. In fact, he's already out there today promising us all that he's going to release everything he has on Hillary Clinton right before the election, when it's going to be way too late to do any good. He's a phony. He's an absolute phony.
Okay, well, I understand your position on that. I have another question, if you'll allow it.
Sure.
Okay. Do you have an explanation on why, on the Federal Reserve notes, do you have an explanation on why there are signatures on the Federal Reserve notes, 2 signatures, but no printed name beneath the signatures? There are signatures and I guess the, position, the capacity of the person, but yet there are no printed names on the Federal Reserve notes under the signatures. Do you have an explanation for that?
Not really, but then it's all kind of monopoly money anyway, and I guess their assumption is that, like everybody on Wall Street, we would just automatically know the names of the Secretary of the Treasury and the Treasurer of the United States. And those are just put on there to fool people into thinking that the Federal Reserve is part of the U.S. government, which it isn't. It's no more federal than Federal Express.
Okay, thank you very much. Great show as usual.
All right, thank you, Karen. We're going to switch on over to Byron in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, just a few thoughts I had. When are we going to start calling, when Muslims, they say these radical, crazy Muslims, when are we going to start calling Christians that are bombing countries crazy, radical Christians?
It's an excellent question. It's an excellent question.
Yeah, how come if there's a terrorist act in the United States, it's these extremist Muslims, and we know, at least most people I think know, that most of them are FBI or whatever, guided. San Bernardino, all the witnesses had 3 paramilitary guys, and all of a sudden they kill a little girl and a boy. I guess the eyewitnesses don't mean anything. But when are we going to start coming out and start calling crazy, radical Christians that are doing all this? They don't have no trouble, saying Muslims.
Well, Muslims are the designated scapegoat group. Our government is using Muslims exactly the same way the Nazis used the Jews. Somebody to blame all the problems on, to have an enemy, a demon, and George Orwell in 1984 had Emmanuel Goldstein and his people. Governments, in order to control you through fear, must have an enemy. And an internal enemy allows for the suppression of domestic rights and freedoms, and an external enemy justifies taking your money and your children for wars of adventure across the globe.
Yeah, and the other thing I just want to bring up, and I know that you're not going to like this, but I take Donald Trump, I think, is a phony. And I'm a I'm not a Republican because I live in Canada, but I'm a conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And Donald Trump, there's a video, and I think it might have been on your website, where back in 2001, where he's talking, and he says that bombs brought the buildings down.
Yeah.
And yet, in his campaign, it's those Muslims that was doing it, and they're cheering. Right there it tells me he's going to be.
Let me ask you a question, Byron. Let me ask you a question. Do you think he is more of a fraud than Hillary Clinton is?
Oh, I think Hillary Clinton ought to be given a trial before maybe an international court with a lot of these Muslim countries that she destroyed. Get some good, Okay,
well here's our situation. Here's our situation. Donald Trump is far from being perfect. Okay, I will acknowledge that. Okay, but instead of deciding whether or not we should vote for Donald Trump, let's just remember all the reasons we have to vote against Hillary Clinton, and you will attain enlightenment for the coming election. Okay?
I understand what you're saying, but it's just too damn, like somebody said, there ain't a bit of difference between a Republican and Democrat. And then you look at the family members of Donald Trump. Now,
okay, Byron, listen to me for a second, okay? I will agree. There's no difference between the professional politicians on the Democratic side and the professional politicians on the Republican side. What makes Donald Trump attractive is he's from the outside, okay? He has not spent his entire life living off the taxpayers, and he's not part of this narcocracy that has ruled this country for the last 30 years. Anyway, I understand your opinion, but we both agree that, given a choice between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump is, the lesser of several evils out there. So, Byron, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Roseanne in North Carolina. Roseanne, aloha. Welcome to the show. You guys hunkering down for the hurricane?
Not yet. I'm one of those, but I'm 2 hours inland, so I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, the latest storm track is showing that it's probably going to turn eastward out over the Atlantic, down in South Carolina, so you're probably going to escape the brunt of it. We're going to take a second here to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Roseanne, what is on your mind?
I just wanted to share a little jocularity I just had with a troll, trolling a troll on Breitbart.com.
Mm-hmm.
And he was going all over, carrying on about how Kane was able to get all kinds of sound bites last night and blah, 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 and how Pence lost and whatever. And you can get in the system where you can see every comment he makes. So I went out there and I got I pasted the Guccifer, I think that's how you say it, Guccifer 2.0 website, and just said, hey, everybody, get your copies hot off the press. And I just went and hit every single comment. That was the response to every single comment he put. And it just felt good to spread the news.
Yeah, well, that's how it's going to get on out there because, like I said earlier in the show, the corporate media that gave Julian Assange headline treatment over doing absolutely nothing so that they could say, see, there's nothing on Hillary. They're totally ignoring the Guccifer 2.0 releases. And there's stuff in there, pay for play, kickbacks on TARP, and it's absolutely stunning. And the corporate media is going to, it is, and the corporate media is going to pretend it doesn't exist. Again, I had a little fun. I just had a little fun spreading the news is all. Well, I applaud you for that. Thank you very much. You are now an official member of the independent media. Okay, well, have a good one, Michael. All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and get on back here to some news. Now, Iraq has issued a warning regarding Turkish forces in Iraq right now, saying that there will be a regional war if Turkey does not withdraw their troops. Now, Turkey may go along with that if it can be done in a way that saves face, because ever since that botched U.S. coup, Erdogan is pivoting away from the U.S. coalition. And he might come on down and say to Iraq, look, let's work together. Let's, throw the Americans out because they keep bombing our own people, and we'll take care of the terrorist groups ourselves. So that's a rapidly evolving situation. But especially in that part of the world, it's got to be done in a way where everybody saves face. Now, the militia is reporting worsening of conditions in Donbass. It's almost like nobody's even bothering to even note that there's supposed to be a ceasefire there. So the U.S. is, again, through Poroshenko, pushing to provoke Russia to do something that the U.S. can use to say, Russia started this world war. They're desperate. They are so desperate. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry claims that Kiev is plotting provocations against Russian officers. Again, trying to trigger some kind of a Russian response that can be seized on as a propaganda device to make it look like this is all Russia's fault. They're really going to start World War III. It's going to be bloody. It's going to be messy. It could even be nuclear. The only part they're missing is a way to make it look like it's the other side's fault. Because in the court of world opinion, the aggressor loses. And by the way, since the dawn of the industrial age, every nation that's actually started a war wound up eventually losing it. Now, a Russian high-ranking diplomat has met with the Saudi Arabian delegation. They're having discussions. And what it tells me is this brain-dead JASTA bill, along with triggering reverse lawsuits against the U.S. and the threat of the Saudis simply yanking their money out of our economy, Saudi Arabia is not going to be such a good friend of the United States anymore. They just got stabbed in the back. And that's a hard lesson to learn. And they, too, are starting to pivot away from the United States and toward Russia. And the corporate media is going to scream, Russia's bad, Russia's bad, Russia's bad. No, the U.S. is doing this to itself. The U.S. government is doing this to itself with its botched, brain-dead, New American Century agenda. Army Chief of Staff General Mark Milley is out there basically saying it's time to consider war with Russia. We're ready to destroy our enemies. All right, General, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your Day-Glo jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture center. Go and have fun. Let's take another phone call. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha, Michael. I want to tweak your head for a moment. Listening to your conversation with the one man from Canada, got me thinking about something or realized something. Since Trump is coming from outside the so-called system of red, blue, Democrat, Republican, whatever you want to call it, it's the same snake or whatever you want to call it. Wouldn't it have been better if he had been running as an independent than as a Republican?
No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't, because the system is rigged against the independents. If you are the Republican nominee or the Democratic nominee, your name automatically goes on the ballots in all 50 states. If you are a third-party candidate, you have to run petition drives in every single state to get on the ballot. It uses up your volunteers' time, it uses up money and other resources, and it was set up that way to keep those pesky third parties from spoiling the game for the establishment politicians.
Interesting, considering the fact that he's supposed to be outside the system, which basically tells me that, well, I know that's going to really rub some people's backs the wrong way, but he's a part of it, even though it seems like he's on the outside of it.
Well, he's not part of the political system. He's part of the economic system, and he's part of the economic system playing by the rules, and that may be why Wall Street is so terrified of him. Because right now, Wall Street is surviving on bending the rules and breaking the rules. Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, the rigging of LIBOR, the rigging of gold and silver prices. Wall Street is being propped up by criminality, and I don't think Donald Trump is going to sit still for that because it makes honest businessmen like him look bad.
Well, there is this, too. However, I do have an odd question for you since you start my train of thought, though. How do you end up separating the financial scene from the political scene when they seem to be going hand in hand?
Well, the financial aspect and the political aspect overlap only in terms of the buying and selling of influence. Not every company in America, let me finish, not every business in America is making donations to candidates or lobbying them, and there's a lot of us out here who are, have some party affiliation, and we're living our lives and doing our job, but we don't get tangled up in that mess. It is that corrupting influence, and Donald Trump is really has not been part of it. He's done his business dealings the right way, the legal way. And I think that's why Wall Street's afraid of him, because right now, without fraud, Wall Street is going to collapse. There was even an article that came out, I think, about 2 years ago, where they went out and interviewed a whole bunch of Wall Street traders about all the fraud going on, and 25% of the people that they interviewed were honest enough to say, yes, they regularly committed fraud against their clients and customers, and they even went on to say, if we weren't doing it, we would have gone out of business long ago. And that makes, honest businessmen look bad. It's like all these Hispanics who are switching over to support Donald Trump because the illegal immigrants coming on in, the MS-13, the druggies, the rapists, and all the rest of that, they're making Hispanics who became citizens in this country legally look bad. And they're turning their backs on that.
Well, you know something? You're causing the tune of the Twilight Zone to go off in my head at the moment. So thanks so much, Michael.
All right. Thanks an awful lot, I
Later.
think. All right. Bye-bye. We're going to let you go. Now, there's been a new article that came on out talking about Libya and how that mess all got started. This is in Counterpunch. And along with the gold-backed dinar, which was a major, major threat to the fiat currencies of the West. That came out actually in a NATO memo that was leaked about a week ago. But Counterpunch is also pointing out that Gaddafi was trying to build up Libya without having to borrow money from bankers to do it. And the issue they have here is how Africa first developed its own transcontinental communication system by purchasing a telecommunications satellite, and then the African Development Bank ponied up most of the money to the cost of the launch. And they were able to just buy the system and put it into operation without having to go on the hook to the international private central banks, and even better, without having to be paying high costs to an established provider. And that was apparently one of the reasons why all these bankers and these established corporations got very angry with Gaddafi. How dare you do all of this without going through us? It's the same attitude we see on a smaller scale here in the United States of America. How dare you grow marijuana in your backyard instead of buying alcohol and tobacco? How dare you grow your own food? How dare you collect rainwater instead of buying it from Nestle? All wars really are banker wars. It really, really is. Now, I want to reprise a story I mentioned yesterday. I was talking about these MRAP vehicles, these heavily armored trucks from the United States that have been given to Egypt by the United States. They got 762 of them last May. They got another batch, I don't know how many, recently, at no cost to Egypt, but obviously, of course, at cost to you. And it's been sort of bugging me what Egypt needs that many MRAPs for. Egypt's already been through 2 revolutions, and there's no indication that the people are of a mind to have a third one. And then it dawned on me to look at a map and realize that the western border of Egypt meets up with the eastern border of Libya, and so it looks to me like the U.S. is getting ready to escalate the situation in Libya by opening a second front from Egypt. All right, we're going to take a phone call. George in Texas, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I could tell you one thing. Kane just looked like a mentally ill clown without makeup.
I've heard people describe him as looking creepy, and he's the perfect partner to be with Hillary Clinton. He fights the same way. But I think people looking at him, they just get that weird feeling. I mean, I've often talked about how looking at Hillary Clinton, she looks like the crabby old aunt that you go out of your way not to have to talk to at the family reunions. And Kane makes a perfect uncle in that same category. And he just came across as slightly creepy and a bit of a jerk because of all of his constant interruptions. He was just clearly working to keep Pence from making a coherent point.
The thing is, I called up the Trump campaign. I hope many people do, and tell Mike Pence that instead of saying Russia invaded Crimea and all that stuff, they ought to get the facts. And I think Pence ought to change his position from in Syria and Ukraine of non-intervention and de-escalation. We don't belong there.
Well, unlike Donald Trump, Pence is a professional politician, and he is playing to the masses based on what he thinks the majority of Americans believe. And he may be dangerously misinformed about that at that point. In fact, I've often talked about Rivero's law of the hierarchy, where all mid-level managers try and make sure they're the only ones who know what's going on. They don't want their superiors to crack down on them or their subordinates to give up hope. And if you're sitting on a couple of layers of that kind of middle management and communication, you're effectively deaf, dumb, and blind. And Pence is surrounded by people who may be telling him what they think he wants to hear rather than what he actually needs to know. Got to let you go here, George. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go back to the phone lines here, I just got this very bizarre email from Barton Chevrolet Cadillac reminding me that it's time for the service on my 2015 Chevy Silverado. I've never owned a Silverado. They must be getting desperate. They're just going to fling this stuff out there, and I don't know who they bought their mailing list from, but they're obviously just making this stuff up. You know, these days I get more telemarketer calls and scam calls on my cell phone than I do real calls. I'm thinking of changing my phone number to one of those 976 exchanges so that everybody who calls me has to pay $5, and I'll waive the fee for people that I know and like and everything. I think we all ought to do that. And let's let the telemarketers pay us for a difference, because they're not even supposed to call us. We're on all the lists here and everything. Let's see. Mike in the control room is saying he gets those calls here at the network. You know, I'm getting calls for stuff. It's completely inappropriate for me. It's just bizarre. And I know these companies are out there buying these mailing lists and contacting customer lists, and apparently that's turned into a racket too. They just grab everything they can and say, oh yeah, these are all people who own Silverados. There you go. Anyway, all right, let's take a phone call. Mike in Tennessee. Boy, a lot of mics on the show today. What's on your mind?
Greetings, Michael. You have to tell us more about that 976 number. That sounds like a great idea. I would love to have a revenue stream from these, otherwise annoying calls. For the previous caller's edification, what she needs to grasp is that Trump is not leverageable because he does not have, as they say in the political world, he doesn't have a live boy or a dead girl in his closet. And because they can't leverage him, they can't extort him. The whole name of the game is extortion. Everybody in that political bed is extorting one another. That's why you got Republicans lining up with Clinton, because they know that if she falls, they fall, because she knows their secrets.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. In fact, it may be, part of the initiation into the higher levels of government that you have to do something really tacky, like have sex with a small child and let yourself be photographed so you're blackmailable and reliable. And the other aspect of it, too, of course, is that Donald Trump has his own money. He can't be bought. He's not for sale. And that is absolutely deadly to our current political system, where everything is for sale.
That is the reason I was named the most dangerous man in the county that I live in, because I could not be bought or extorted. A man or a woman who cannot be extorted is a dangerous thing to these people, because they can't be controlled. They're not a puppet or a tool. And that scares the heck out of these folks, because for their entire existence, they've operated under this code of control.
Yes, absolutely. All right, well, listen, thank you very much for the phone call. I agree with you completely, and we're going to get on back here to the news. Now, as you know, one of the areas where the United States government has been making stink face with Russia is regarding the Arctic Ocean. Now, up until recently, everybody very reasonably took those countries that actually border the Arctic and drew a line up to the North Pole and said that's our commercial zone. And the U.S. has now been saying, well, no, we need a bigger part of the Arctic. There's oil down there somewhere, and we need to develop it, and we're ready to stand tough against Russia to cut off part of their ocean commerce zone and make it ours and everything. And it's one of those areas where they're talking tough, and they really can't come up to it, because there's an article over in Pravda pointing out that whereas Russia, because it does border the Arctic, has had decades of developing cold weather technology, icebreakers, drilling rigs, and so forth. The U.S. hasn't. The U.S. doesn't actually have the technologies ready to go to operate in the Arctic. I mean, every once in a while, the U.S. will send a nuclear sub up around there to poke around and show how butch they are. But in terms of day-to-day operations, I mean, except for the Ice Road Truckers show, the U.S. really doesn't have a whole heck of a lot going on up there. Now, we're getting our daily dose of booga booga It's being reported that ISIS is calling for random knife attacks in alleys and forests and beaches and quiet neighborhoods all across America, which means any anonymous knife attacks that happen are going to be blamed on ISIS. But let's just assume for a moment this is true. Isn't that a good reason to start controlling those borders and not letting these potential ISIS assassins in here on a free pass? We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to talk about the economy for a little bit here, and the headline breaking news ought to be how $30,000 was stolen from each and every one of you. That should be the headline breaking news, but we're going to go back to Kim Kardashian and the things that supposedly happened to her. Now, Greg Hunter just did an interview with Catherine Austin Fitz, and one of the topics that came on out, remember how you keep hearing the Pentagon has managed to misplace trillions and trillions of dollars? The number keeps growing. And right now it is at $9 trillion. The Pentagon has spent somewhere, but nobody knows. They can't find it. And apparently the Pentagon has just been cooking the books to try and make like everything's balanced, but they don't know where the money's going. $9 trillion works out to $30,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States of America, money that's been taken away from you or you are considered to still owe with accruing interest to the Federal Reserve. $30,000. Now, it's official as of the end of last month, which is the end of the U.S. government's fiscal year. They closed the fiscal year $1.4 trillion deeper into debt. It's like that old Tennessee Ernie Ford song, 16 tons. Another day over and you're deeper in debt. Another year over, we're deeper in debt. And by the way, that debt growth is equal to 7.5% of the entire U.S. economy. Now, in just about 8 years, because we're coming up on the end of Obama's 2 terms in office, the U.S. national debt has grown $9 trillion. Just think, if the Pentagon hadn't misplaced that money, we could say we were in a debt-free society. Mike in the control room is saying, can we just pay our 30 G's and cash out? Sounds legit to me. I think we ought to sue class action. It was all taken from us through fraud anyway. Now, back in April, there was a lawsuit that was started when metals traders charged several banks for fixing the price of precious metals, primarily gold. And back in April, Deutsche Bank agreed to settle this lawsuit going all the way back to 2014. And the banks that were involved were Deutsche Bank, Bank of Nova Scotia, HSBC, and then later UBS was added to the defendants. And it was expected that the bankers would just keep their lawyers stalling in court, stalling. And apparently, in order to focus on its other larger troubles, Deutsche Bank has now agreed to an out-of-court settlement. But like I keep telling you, they are all surviving on fraud and criminality. If they were complying with the law, if they were doing business honestly, they'd be out of business right now. And the fact that they're having to resort to such massive fraud to stay in business, to me, says that the regular economy of people working for decent wages and salaries and then pumping that new money back into the system, buying cars, buying homes, buying big screen plasma TVs, has already ground to a halt. Now, there was a story about how the federal government busted the largest food stamp fraud in U.S. history, $13 million. This was out of Palm Beach County and involved conversion of food stamp cards into cash. And for some reason, YouTube has yanked the video about that story. Somebody doesn't want the details to come on out. Now, we're hearing from an article in Zero Hedge that despite Merkel's refusal, ultimately Deutsche Bank will be bailed out by Germany. But if that happens, it sets another problem because other European banks are in serious trouble like Credit Suisse. And if they bail out Deutsche Bank, there won't be anything left to bail out Credit Suisse. The crash is coming. It just may be put off one bank down the road. And here is where all of these world leaders are oblivious to what's really going on. When you enslave your country to a private central bank by allowing that private bank to issue all the public currency as a loan at interest, you are enslaved. You can never pay the debt off. It's designed that way. Private central banks always create more debt than money with which to pay the debt, and then use that awareness of debt to control the people and the nation. To quote from the International, it is the essence of the banking industry to keep us all, whether we are nations or individuals, slaves to debt. There is nothing you can do to get out of debt to a private central bank. It doesn't matter how much you tax the people. It doesn't matter how much you privatize the nation's resources. The goal of the private central bank is to own everything and reduce you to serfdom. The only solution to save your country and its people is the one that Andrew Jackson did. Shut it down. Okay, we're going to take a phone call from Dennis in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike.
Aloha.
I saw something today that's very interesting. It's about election fraud, and it's actually partially a repost from the still report there, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And evidently, Francis had inquired, why don't we run a third party? And remember, Ron Paul had done that years ago.
I remember when Anderson did it, and he got awfully close to winning, too, but they sabotaged that.
Yeah, well, I was a Ross Perot supporter, too, besides Ron Paul.
Yes.
But what happened is the allegations were made of election fraud, and they got thrown up in the air, and the Republicans, this goes back some years, didn't want to look like racists because they were trying to court the black vote back then. And what happened is the Democrats were going to make them look like it was a racial thing to deny people the right to vote and stuff like that.
They're doing it now. I mean, when they overturn all the laws for voter ID, that you have to prove you are the voter who is casting that vote. It's racist. It's discriminatory. It's an attack on the black population. You know, I know a lot of black people. They've all got driver's licenses.
Yeah. Well, evidently, they were very sensitive, the Republicans, because they were trying to court the minority vote back then. It was looked at as like a party of old white people. And so they backed off from this whole thing. And what happened is they agreed to what they call a consent decree, with the courts. And it was to last for so many years, like 17 years. It doesn't expire until 2017. And that's why Ron Paul never made a big thing about the election fraud, because the Republicans are under that consent decree. And any time they had even tried to do it, they wound up running against a brick wall. It would be terribly expensive, and they can't get the judge to give them any leeway on it. But it's on the Still report, a good article about it. I have a little bit of humor for you also.
I could use it.
I posted it's kind of like a fantasy kind of a thing about, this Assange thing, and we really don't need him. And here's what I posted, really. He said, we don't need Assange. The New York Times will do for a start. Let me explain. Trump's got it all covered. He's the one who really leaked the tax papers. It's only one or two pages to the New York Times, and that's brilliant. By doing this, they get the black guy, and he becomes endeared to the voting public. The reporter goes to jail because he's thrown under the New York Times bus, and Trump sues.
Yep.
Because the publisher has editorial control over it, and so they're the ones who ultimately hold responsible. Trump sues and winds up owning the New York Times, and as a result, the voters vote him into office by a landslide, Eric Trump and Bill Still then run the new New York Times editorial page to support the congressional and senatorial candidates that will cooperate with the Donald. The next step, the wall gets built and Mexico pays for it. Next step, the Supreme Court gets straightened out. And,
that's going to be tricky because Trump has to wait for a Supreme Court judge to retire or to pass away. And, they do linger on for a very long time unless they're assassinated like happened to that pro-Second Amendment guy. I'm blanking on his name.
Right. Well, the fantasy continues. BL members are hunted by the populace, and they, along with the welfare-grabbing, U.S.-hating Mexicans and Muslims, are deported. College kids now have decent jobs during school, during spring break, and in the summertime as a result of the deportation. And you're going to love this one here, all dual citizen Zionist traitors are placed upon a replica of the USS Liberty.
And we'll let them sail 2/3 of the way back to Israel.
Along with John McCain, Nancy Pelosi, and John Kerry. And tickets are sold, allowing purchasers to unmercifully and continually strafe the ship in a reenactment of that Israeli war crime.
Oh, I'd spend $5 for that one myself.
Yeah, well, staffing includes returning war veterans who line up in overwhelming numbers to apply. Everybody has a job.
Yes.
Jesus returns and throws the entire Israeli government into a flaming pit of boiling excrement.
Well, I have one correction for you. We don't really need to build a wall along the border with Mexico. It's cheaper to put crocodiles in the Rio Grande. And I'm going to let you go here because we want to get back to the news here. Those are very, very funny ideas out there. Thank you for the phone call, Dennis. And by the way, the name that I was blanking on was Antonin Scalia, who died under very suspicious circumstances, and I'm on the verge of putting him on the dead bodies list as well. Okay, now then, getting on back to the economic news. Over in Chicago, we know that there's got a huge pension shortfall. A lot of pensions all across America are in trouble, and this all goes back to that 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud because Wall Street's pet rating agencies rated all these bundles as AAA investments, which made it legal for pension funds to invest in them. Then the fraud imploded, and the pensions were defunded, and now they're in trouble, but nobody's got the gonadal tissue to stand up and point the finger of blame where it richly deserves to go, which is, of course, Wall Street. And so Chicago is dealing with this huge pension liability, and it turns out that their accounting methods don't really come up to what is considered standard practice. And in enforcing proper accounting rules on Chicago's pension system, it turns out their liability is actually almost more than 1.5 times what they thought it was. It was being understated by $11.5 billion. At the end of 2015, they claimed the liability was $7.1 billion. Today, it's $18.6 billion. That's a jump of 168%. Rahm Emanuel is out there pushing for union concessions and help from the state legislature, and he's not going to get either one. Because the unions are going to say, hey, this is not our fault. This was mismanaged at the highest levels of the U.S. government. And the state government's going to say exactly the same thing. We had nothing to do with this mess. This is all Wall Street and Washington, D.C. By the way, if you use ATMs, they charge fees unless you're at your home bank. And apparently ATM fees are starting to climb again. I remember there used to be this commercial about this investment thing where the slogan was, we make money the old-fashioned way, we earn it. I think it should be changed to, we make money the old-fashioned way, we just screw it out of our customers here. Now, since 2013, more than 700 department stores have closed. Prior to the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud, consumer spending made up 60% of America's economy. And it's evaporating. And by the way, Claire and I were over at the stores here, and the Christmas stuff is already up. The lights are gleaming and twinkling. And Man, they're just trying so hard. Now, we've all been hearing about Obamacare and its multiple failings. It has failed in its overt purpose of making health care affordable to Americans. It failed in its covert purpose of enriching the health insurance companies that wrote the Affordable Care Act. And it failed in its purpose of providing new tax revenues to a desperately broke and hopelessly in debt U.S. central government. And it's still being touted as President Obama's signature legislation. We're just going to throw money at it and declare it a success by imperial edict. But even the New York Times has come on out saying Obamacare is a disaster. It's too expensive. It's inaccessible. It's bloated. It's convoluted. They botched the opening with that stupid website. And it's another reminder that people in government, for their entire lifetimes, being in government is all they know. They don't actually know how to go on out and do things and make it happen. And that's an advantage Donald Trump has. He's started businesses, hands-on. He's organized building of buildings and stuff. And the Hillary campaign likes to go on out and try and dismiss Donald Trump as a self-made billionaire who has late in life decided to get into politics. And I can think of some other people who were successful and got into politics late in life, like, say, George Washington, or Thomas Jefferson, or John Adams, or Ben Franklin, those guys. They weren't career politicians, remember? And they did a pretty darn good job of setting up a nation that worked for the American people. So I think it is definitely time to go on back to having people who are successful in the real world, building things, making things, companies, architecture, engineering, whatever, it doesn't matter, and getting those people into a government that's supposed to represent the American people. Because looking at Congress right now, one would be thinking that the entire population of the United States of America consists of heirs to million-dollar fortunes from their parents, spoiled brats, and lawyers, and that's it. There's no room for carpenters and bakers and bricklayers and computer programmers and engineers. They're just not allowed into the club. So we have a bunch of people who don't know anything about what makes this country work, presuming to be in control of everything. And Obamacare is a classic example of why that does not work. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go back to the phones here, I want to share a little story with you for all you technoids out there. Now, obviously, this being live radio, the accuracy of our timepieces between here in Oahu and the control room for public broadcasting, say that 3 times fast, has to be down to the second. And in my office, I have a wall clock that receives a radio signal from the U.S. government's atomic clocks to keep it right accurate. And today, it was off by an hour. It had been set back by an hour, and I'm scratching my head trying to figure out what's going on. And then I realized daylight savings time ends next month on November 5th. Today is October 5th. So somebody inside the U.S. government, which controls things they don't understand, apparently goofed, and I'll bet you there's a lot of these radio control clocks all over the country right now that are now an hour off. And I'm searching the news for people complaining about that or reporting it, but that seems to be the explanation for what happened there. All right, let's take a phone call from Steve in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, well, Michael, let's not forget about that official. I can't recall his name. You'll probably remember it. But the official that said, don't worry about Obamacare, that people are stupid, they'll buy it, or something like that. I can't remember that whole phrase, but I do remember the concept, basically, that they'll pull one over on us with the Obamacare, and that they're stupid sheeple, and they'll just take it.
Well, I mean, there's a whole list of people in Washington, D.C. who've made statements that are very, very similar. Remember when Nancy Pelosi was out there saying we have to pass it before we can read it? I mean, that's one of the most absurd things I've ever heard. The job of a member of Congress is you carefully read the legislation before you vote for it. And it's just like this big circus. It's a joke. It really is.
Well, there's a main person in this whole picture. I'll have to Google it again because it's on Google, on YouTube, and it's a main figure that basically said, we'll pull one over them. They're pretty stupid. Didn't know he was being recorded. I can't recall
If you
his name,
find it, send it to me. I want to put it up there, and we need to do that because this is how the government sees us all. They have no respect for us as human beings. They really do think that we are all easy to fool morons, and they're really seriously out of touch with just how bad the loss of trust and confidence is out here in the hinterland.
I'll look for that and I'll find it and send it over your way.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here, coming up on the top of our third hour here. The border surge is now growing, and apparently the human traffickers are seriously considering that Donald Trump is going to win the election next month, and he's going to set up that Great Wall of Trump or put crocodiles in the Rio Grande, which I think is the more cost-effective solution. And so they're trying to rush as many people as they can in as quickly as they can. And the big question, and it's an important question, is if Donald Trump wins, and we go back to being a nation that is dedicated to the law-abiding legal citizens, what do we do with all the undocumented? I think a trebuchet down in Texas, just fling them back over the border. We'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to go to Mateus in Canada. Aloha, Mateus. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. How do you say your national flower again, or national bird?
The bald eagle?
No, you have some crazy Hawaiian name.
Our state fish is the huma huma nuku nuku apua.
Okay, that's what it was. Hey,
our state bird is the mosquito.
And then how do you do the Hawaiian greeting? Okay, never mind. Regarding Creepy Kane.
Yes.
So the whole idea is that the vice president is going to know about a lot of the crimes of the Clinton cartel. So he has to be completely controllable.
Absolutely.
So he probably really is the child molester. He doesn't just look like one. He probably really is. Like there's like a 50-50 chance that he is. Or at least he's a rapist or he's killed somebody or something like that, because you're not going to be allowed to get that close to the Clinton crime family unless you are 100% controllable.
Well, the primary means of control, again, is that drug money corruption, because it's huge amounts of money. It's getting laundered through all these different banks like HSBC and probably the Clinton Foundation as well, because they're certainly not spending that money on actual charity. There was that one source inside the FBI who was anonymously putting out information who said that the Clinton Foundation is nothing but a giant slush fund, and all of the main players in Washington, D.C. are dipping into it. And obviously, if you are receiving that volume of cash, you're not going to do anything to upset that boat. It's like I was telling Clinton Las Vegas. You've got people coming in there. They got lots of money to spend and gamble and do the hookers and everything. And they like life. It's working for them. They're not going to question anything or cause anything to upset their comfortable little lives. They don't realize they're going to lose it anyway in the final crash. But anybody who's on the inside of Washington, they're going to be corrupted because we've seen this corrupting machine taking over the government bit by bit for the last 30 years. And as I mentioned before, it is, in fact, a replay of what happened during Prohibition.
Yeah, I think that definitely applies for sure to all the low and mid and like upper level. But at the echelon, at the very top, you're not allowed to get in unless you've got something worse than that, I think. Like, it's not a coincidence that Bill Clinton's a rapist. Like, he had to be a rapist to be allowed to be president, for example. And it's not a coincidence that Hillary, they're trying to make the next president, and she's guilty of crimes against humanity, for example, like to use against.
Well, I think Bill Clinton. I think Bill Clinton. His sexual adventures notwithstanding, what constrains him, what makes him controllable, is that entanglement with the CIA's gun and drug running operation out of Arkansas down to Nicaragua back in the mid-1980s. We're looking at serious jail time for all the people involved in that, because what the CIA was doing was illegal, and the CIA is not allowed to break the law any more than anybody else. The smuggling operation was a violation of the Bolin Amendment. It was a violation of the Logan Act, and certainly smuggling 20 tons of cocaine back into the United States to sell to our children and then laundering the money, making themselves all rich. You know, the fact that it was linked to the U.S. government does not alter the fact that it was a criminal enterprise.
Right. And in the eyes of the public, that's bad, but it's not as bad as being a rapist or a child molester. Like, for example, we make movies about
I don't know. I mean, nothing's ever happened. Well, yes, Bill Clinton got impeached for that. But I think the real reason that Bill and Hillary Clinton are untouchable is because they know where all the dead bodies are buried and how they got to be dead bodies. And it's just the entire government is this giant ball of cross-connected blackmail going on out. And the first string that breaks, it's all going to unravel.
Yeah, totally. So my point is just that the Kane doesn't just look creepy. I'm sure he really, really is, because he has to be less desirable than Hillary. And Hillary right now is so undesirable, even by her own people, that they went out of their way to put in a total sleazeball that probably really is a child molester, like, or something really bad like that.
You're jumping to conclusions here. There's a lot of very creepy people that look perfectly normal, and there's a lot of people who were just born looking creepy, that are fine, and you really can't tell from the appearances. In terms of Kane himself, normally, yes, a president will choose a vice president that is so objectionable it's proof against assassination. But in this case, I think Hillary's own people understand with her health issues, she's probably not going to survive her first term. And so Kane was probably picked more with an idea of his willingness to go along with the war agenda and continuing to protect and cover up all these other crimes that have been going on. Because there's a very real possibility. If Hillary steals the White House, there's a real serious possibility that Kane is going to wind up in that Oval Office.
Well, would you at least agree with me that he would make an excellent Joker to be casted in the next Batman series?
Well, if he's looking for work after the election next month, certainly we could put him on in there.
Okay, thanks a lot, Michael.
Okay. We shouldn't judge by appearances here. And I'll give you a good example. Do you remember Eddie Kruger from Nightmare on Elm Street? What a horrible person he looked like and everything. The actor playing him was just this sweetheart of a guy. And you have to look at him and say, how could they have even thought about casting this guy? Well, because with the makeup and the claws and everything, he looked the part. But he was really a sweetheart, very gentle, very, very gentle guy. Anyway, we're going to go to James in Northern California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thanks so much for your efforts at this time. I would just like to point out, which I'm sure you already know, that despite all of the efforts to divide us at every opportunity, the real dichotomy of our time that really matters is humanity versus these globalists.
Yes, that's a big part of it.
I would suggest that all that ails us, and I think I'm being literal, all, has lineage to these people. In fact, Steve in California and I did a little radio show, a humble effort. Doesn't belong in the same breath as yours. We did a dozen shows. We were shut down. We were speaking a little too much.
Flattery will get you nowhere, but don't stop trying.
We had a show where I submitted that all that ails us has lineage to these globalists, and I challenged any callers to bring up something that we couldn't connect the dots to these globalists, and nobody could.
Well, there's absolutely no doubt that those who are pushing for the New World Order and globalism are responsible for much of the world's troubles. Certainly this refugee crisis is out there. But humans basically break down into two groups. Those who just want to be left alone and live their lives and do what they can do with their jobs and homes and families. And then you have that other group that feels that the entire world should be ruled by a single leader and it should be them. And out of that group of people come all the wars and the predatory banking systems and deceptive media, and the rest of it. These are people who really do believe that all the rest of humanity exists only to serve them. And it's a defect. I think it's a mental illness, and we need to find a way to screen it out from our politicians. In fact, if you really think about it, the very best person to serve as ruler of a nation is going to be somebody who really doesn't want the job, because it's simply more trouble than it's worth to them. We're going to have to find the very best person and draft him in and say, look, whether you like it or not, you're the president for 4 years. And if you do a really good job, we'll let you out after 4 years. If you do a lousy job, you're stuck here for 8 years. And I think you'd actually find that they would do a really good job, because they don't want to put up with all that nonsense. It really is a lot of work and inconvenience to be president. And those who put up with it do so only because it feeds their ego. I have Secret Service around me. I live in the White House. I have hot and cold running interns to serve my every pleasure day and night. And they get very, very full of themselves. Having worked in Hollywood, I have seen some monstrous egos that you absolutely would not believe. I'm not going to name any names, so relax. And you look at these people and you figure, how could they have even survived this long without somebody just putting them out of their misery? And maybe it's the process of being a big star that does it, or maybe they were just all that way. And I remember very early in my career meeting somebody who was not at all a success, and they were just so full of themselves. They were so absolutely assured they were going to be a big star and win an Academy Award. And they did flame out, and they didn't really go anywhere. But yeah, there are some monstrous egos out there, and I think it's a defect. We all need a little ego to get through society, but these self-centered sociopaths, we have got to keep them away from the tops of corporations and the tops of our government.
Yes. Haven't studies shown that about 4% of the population are sociopaths?
Yes.
Well, I would imagine that a much, much higher percentage of those in our government right now are sociopaths, right?
There's no question about it. There's no question about it. And they make
empathy for others.
And because of that, they're wonderful liars. See, normal people who have a sense of shame and guilt when they lie, there's a little tell, they're going to cringe, and because they know they're doing wrong. Sociopaths can lie without any feeling about it, because for them it's just normal life. You are here for me to lie to you, and I am doing what nature says I should do. I should lie to you in order to get what I want from you, and that's perfectly normal behavior. Unfortunately, the big myth about the psychiatric field is that there's any kind of an absolute test that determines somebody is manic depressive or psychotic or sociopathic. It's very subjective. There's no machine they can hook you up to where there's a needle that swings over and says sociopath. You don't know that somebody is that way until after they've committed some kind of an overt act that you recognize they have this lack of empathy. And probably what complicates the issue is that there's probably a lot of people going around with these kind of tendencies who never get the opportunity to act them out. But we do need to get them out of power. One of the easiest to recognize, of course, are the money junkies. Because these are the people who want to
money changers.
Money changers are a subset of the money junkies. Mm-hmm. And again, I've got nothing against people who want to become rich by building a better product or offering a better service. We admire people like James Cameron and Steve Jobs who make things we voluntarily trade our money for. That's how capitalism is supposed to work. And we admire, and we should admire and respect people who become rich that way, just like we should admire Donald Trump, who got rich by being a businessman. It's these scammers who game the system so that money just flows to them automatically, even when they're sitting on their rear end doing absolutely nothing. Those are the true money junkies. And once you know to look for them, they're easy to recognize. For one thing, the private central banks are full of them. Maybe we should cement over those doors, along with the bunkers.
Well, I guess a deal is when two parties agree. That's free market capitalism. When only one party is agreeing, I guess we have kind of like what we have now.
Fascism. And there has to be consideration on both sides. There has to be consent on both sides, and it's coded into contract law. What made that Credit River case so upsetting to the money junkies was they literally had this court decision that said because a bank just makes the numbers up out of thin air when you get a mortgage, that they really had not provided consideration for their side of the contract. It was just a scam. We will type numbers into your account, you can go buy a house, and from now on until you die, you will work and give us back money at interest. Because obviously you and I, we're not allowed to just create money out of thin air. Basically, the Federal Reserve is a legalized counterfeiting operation.
Yes. Well,
okay.
I would just say this. Thanks so much for taking my call. The good thing about people is that in an emergency, they come together.
Yes, they do.
And I hope in this next chapter we come together like we never have before.
We're going to have to survive here. And by the way, left to themselves, most people can get along just fine with each other. It's these sociopaths who seek power, and they build their power by dividing people. Oh, they're coming to get you. They're insulting you. They hate you for your freedoms. And then they go to the other side and say, oh, these other people are getting ready to attack you here. And then I'm going to sell weapons to both of you, loan you the money to sell the weapons to both of you. They're the cause of all the discord in history. And it's all about acquiring wealth and power to themselves. And we need to screen our population for those things. Planned Parenthood wants to redeem itself. Planned Parenthood needs to come up with a way of identifying which fetuses are going to turn into sociopaths and aborting those and those only. Society will be the better for it. Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. We're going to let you go
here. Thank you so
here.
much for your effort.
Thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. I've had a bunch of people write on in to tell me that the gentleman who talked about the stupidity of the American voter in getting through Obamacare was MIT professor Jonathan Gruber. And basically saying lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. Yeah, it is. If the American people don't know what you're doing, it's easier to get away with it. And then they said, and basically called it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever, but it was really, really critical for the thing to pass. Now, it was only really critical for the thing to pass for the health insurance companies that wrote the bill and for the U.S. government, which is broke and in debt, hopelessly so, and won't realize that's the design intent of private central banking. And it was essential for them. But it's been a huge, huge failure. Huge failure. Now then, turning over to Europe, the new leader of the pro-Brexit UK Independence Party, UKIP, Diane James, after just 18 days, has resigned, citing personal and professional reasons. So we don't know what's going on there, but with her stepping down, Nigel Farage is now once again the leadership of UKIP. So all that effort to get him out came to naught. Now the IMF is warning that Brexit is just the start of a worldwide revolution against globalization, and in their mind that's a bad thing. And the IMF is coming on out saying that a revolt against Brexit threatens to lower living standards. Well, meaning the living standards of the money junkies. Because ordinary people like you and I, we're already seeing major declines in our standard of living under growing globalism. Just ask all those people in Europe dealing with a flood of refugees. The globalists want to take us back to feudalism or serfdom, where the money junkies will own everything, and you will need their permission to do anything in your life. America was built on a model of people owning the land. Feudalism is built on the model of the land owning the people. And that's literally what they're trying to get back to. They think all this nonsense about democracy and republic and self-government has got to go away. We need to bring the human race back under divine rulership of the bankers. Now, there's a new movie out, yet another remake, a remake of Birth of a Nation, and critics are pointing out that it seems like this film is deliberately engineered to incite African Americans to attack white people. And we have seen other movies like this, like Django Unchained, where they're out there literally trying to convince the black population that it's okay to go on out and attack white people. And that really is very, very silly. Now, let me get back to this story. This actually came out yesterday, and I wanted to talk about it. First of all, the United Nations has come out with this ludicrous idea that it's time for the white people of America to pay all the black people of America reparations for slavery. And that is a nonsensical idea for a couple of reasons. First of all, in the antebellum South, less than 2% of the white people actually owned slaves. And get ready for the real shocker. A lot of antebellum slave owners were themselves black. So how do you sort out who owes reparations to who? More about this when we come back. Hello, hi America. Welcome back to the show. And of course, we understand that the Hillary Clinton campaign has been trying to fan up race hatred in the hope that the black voters would flock to her to be saved from the oppressive, evil, white, male, slave owner, blah, 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 blah. And now the UN is getting on in saying that all white Americans now owe all black Americans for slavery. A couple of points we need to make. First of all, no living black man ever was a slave over and above the fact that we are all slaves to that 1040 form. No living white person is a slave owner other than the owners of that private central bank. Now, General Robert E. Lee, in a letter to his own wife, said that slavery is a moral and political evil, but at the same time, the blacks living in the American South were much better off than those still in Africa. And if you look at our present-day black population in America versus the blacks still living in Africa, you'll realize that it hasn't been a raw deal. Now, the reality is, according to U.S. Census figures in 1860, only 1.4% of whites owned slaves. And a lot of free Negroes themselves owned other black slaves. In fact, in numbers disproportionate to their representation in society at large. Now, I'd like to point out something else. First of all, I do not accept responsibility or guilt for any events outside my direct ability to influence. I certainly do not accept any kind of a collective guilt or responsibility for events that happened almost 100 years before I was born. Now, my ancestors did not own slaves. They were abolitionists. They ran a station on the Underground Railroad helping escaped slaves to freedom. So no, I'm not planning on paying reparations to slaves. And I'll put that in context. What would happen if I went up to Canada right now and I found the descendants of those escaped slaves that my ancestors had gotten to the Canadian border? And I knocked on their door and I said, hey, you owe me money for what my ancestors did to help your ancestors to freedom. What do you think those people up in Canada would do? They would laugh me off their front porch, and they would be right to do so. That's how silly this is. But right now, they're trying to fan up race hatred to keep us divided and angry with each other so that they can control us. And there's nothing new with that. It's called divide and conquer. The FBI was doing it back in the 1960s. When all of America was uniting together in opposition to the war in Vietnam, the FBI, with its COINTELPRO program, carried out undercover operations to turn blacks and whites against each other. They infiltrated the Black Panthers. They made them militant. They staged crimes blamed on the Black Panthers. There was the famous Black Panther coloring book that all came out during the hearings in the COINTELPRO in the 1970s. This is what they do. And yes, Hollywood is helping them do that by crafting these propaganda movies that are designed to convince black people that they have some kind of a legitimate grievance against white people today in the 21st century in the United States right now. Now, speaking of corporate media, while corporate media was just breathlessly reporting on Kim Kardashian, they were ignoring certain other things, like the fact that diplomacy between Russia and the U.S. and Syria is dead. The fact that the Pentagon dumped $500 million into making propaganda about terrorists to scare you with. How Russia is preparing their civil population for a possible nuclear war. And our government is just going to leave us out there to fry. Bees are now on the endangered species list. The corporate media is here to keep you distracted. That's what they're due. Remember Tom Lehrer's song, We'll All Go Together When We Go? I got to put that up there, along with the song for World War III. It's time to get those things back out there. Now let's get into education and political correctness, because this is getting a little out of control here. Down in Texas, politicians are deliberating a bill that would require schools to teach teenagers. Well, we got to take a break for commercials. You're not going to believe this one. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, let me back up here a little bit and give you some background on this. As you know, there is an epidemic of police brutality all across this nation, and contrary to the propaganda you're getting from Black Lives Matter, the police are actually killing almost twice as many white people as black people. This was research done by the Washington Post. And the police unions are unhappy at all the negative publicity that they're getting, which is why they tried to launch that Blue Lives Matter campaign, which fizzled and went nowhere, because we all know the problem is the police brutality. They're hyped up on prescription antidepressants. They're being trained by Israeli companies to treat the American people the way the IDF treats the Palestinians. It's not going across too well. And down in Texas, instead of like saying, let's keep the guns holstered and let's train the police how to ramp things down peacefully instead of overreacting and shooting everything, down in Texas they're looking at a bill to have the schools teach children the correct way to behave during a traffic stop so that the police won't kill them. And I read this, and the first thing I thought of was the movie The Fifth Element, starred Bruce Willis, science fiction. And every wall, everywhere in that world had these yellow circles on the wall. And whenever the police showed up, you were trained to put your hands in the yellow circles. That's what they're doing to our kids right now. And by the way, none of this teaching the kids how to behave when the police pull them over is going to help these kids get high-paying jobs, is it? It's not going to prepare them for college. It's ridiculous. We need to get our schools back to reading, writing, and arithmetic, science and engineering, actual scholarly stuff. And underscoring that point, apparently up at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, the Women's Center has organized a 9-week series of seminars as part of the Duke's Men's Project that will deconstruct toxic masculinity. If you're a masculine man, there's something wrong with you. Oh, we're going to stick, knives into pictures of John Wayne and Gary Cooper and those people. They're bad role models. You need to emulate proper men's role models like Boy George. And again, how does this prepare a college student to find a job that pays enough to pay back those student loans? They may get headlines with this thing, and the politically correct people are going to say, oh, it's time, we need to demasculinize men so they're less of a threat to the women. I miss the good old days when men were men and knew what bathrooms to use. Those days are gone now. Country's falling off a cliff, and the Democrats' big achievement this year, men can use the ladies' room. Also down in Texas, proving that Texas is almost as crazy as California now. In Grapevine, Texas, parents have pulled their son from a school because the other third graders refuse to see him as a girl. They're claiming this kid is transgender. How does a third grader even know what gender is outside of the plumbing that you're born with? I mean, this is part of this campaign to attack our sense of self, to attack our sense of identity, who we are, where we come from. Because the New World Order needs to erase our historical identity, our regional identity, our cultural identity in order to make us pliant and easy to control. And they have gone so far overboard, it's ridiculous. Now, story coming out of the Telegraph in Great Britain, Joanna Lumley is out there defending men who do a wolf whistle at women by saying it is a compliment, and yes, it is. And Joanna, of course, was famous for the TV series Absolutely Fabulous, and say, how can it be offensive to women? It's a compliment. Well, wolf whistles are offensive to women who aren't being whistled at. That's really what it comes on down to. All this talk about not, acknowledging beautiful women and not paying and not flirting and all the rest of it, it's coming from the women that you wouldn't flirt with in the first place. And that's just a reality. And like I said, it's a matter of fashion. There's no absolute on this. It's not carved in stone. It's not in our DNA. When I worked in Europe in the 1980s and feminism was just getting off the ground in the U.S., where, you can't say a woman is beautiful. That's being an oppressive male to say a woman is beautiful. Okay, you're ugly. Are you happy now? And when I was in Europe, completely different. If you did not flirt with the women in the office, your paperwork would get lost or delayed, or it was just not a priority. Those women wanted to be acknowledged as being pretty and attractive, and if you didn't do that, boy, were you in trouble. Let's talk a little bit about computers here. Google is launching a new program called Jigsaw, and Kurt Nemo is out there saying this is an attempt by Google to undermine the independent media by allowing those with political agendas and secrets to keep to decide for Google whether certain websites and articles should even show up in the search engine anymore. And I think Google has just shot itself in the foot because they're going to open up the door to a new search engine that doesn't believe in censorship. And all the searchers are going to go over there. Google will still have the politically correct, I don't want to be told anything bad about the world market, but that's a small market and they don't have a lot of disposable income because they're too scared about the world to go out of their homes and actually have jobs. It's amazing. Now, do you remember a while back, there was an NSA leak of their premier hacking software that was put out for sale on the internet. And of course, the corporate media said, Russia did this. It was Russia again. It was Russia. Edward Snowden confirmed it was real software developed by the NSA to hack foreign governments, and now it was out in the wild for cybercriminals to be using. Well done, NSA. And this was all back in last August. And the official story is, this was all Russia. Russia did it. Russia did it. Well, actually, no. Because last August, the FBI secretly arrested Hal Martin, a Navy veteran. And Martin worked for Booz Allen Hamilton, the same company that used to employ Snowden. And he stole this software and put it out there for sale. It wasn't Russia. And because the official story was Russia, Russia, Russia bad, Russia bad, Russia bad, they've kept the arrest of this guy secret. The corporate media has not reported it. But we know who stole that software and put it on out there, and it wasn't Russian. It was a Navy veteran. Another employee of the NSA. Now, remember how I keep talking about with all the ransomware that's out there, and some of it now threatens human life because they're targeting hospitals. And if doctors cannot see your patient file, they can make a mistake. They can give you medication you're allergic to. You go into anaphylactic shock and you die. People are dying. And still, the government won't do anything about it because you have to go out and buy security software and they'll pay taxes, and it's good for the economy for you to be constantly attacked by these cyber criminals. Well, fortunately, Kaspersky, which is, by the way, located in Russia, has a somewhat different attitude. And they have released a decryption tool for anybody who has been infected with the Mars Joke ransomware. And they did it in less than a month. And if you get hit by this Mars Joke ransomware, you have 96 hours to pay the roughly $400 ransom before your data is erased. Mars Joke is also known as Polyglot. and it's spread through spam bearing compressed raw attachments, so be very, very careful about that. And Kaspersky has put out a tool that will allow you to recover your data for free, proving that the Russians are much better at cybersecurity than the National Security Agency. Unless the National Security Agency is behind all the ransomware. It's another way to plunder the American people, the way the police do with civil forfeiture. The NSA puts out the ransomware and the dough is rolling on in, and we're going to give some to Israel, and we're going to give some to Wall Street, and we're going to spend the rest on bombs, bullets, and butter to go around the world killing people. And it's not beyond the realm of possibility because Kaspersky has identified the Equation group of known hackers as being part of the NSA. And again, go on back to Arkansas in the mid-1980s. CIA is smuggling guns to Nicaragua, smuggling cocaine back into the U.S., selling it to your children. It is a criminal government. Okay, a quick little mention. Obviously, if you're over there on the southern part of the eastern seaboard, you got to be paying attention to your radio. Hurricane Matthew is coming on in. Charleston and Beaufort counties are being prepared to evacuate. Apparently, they're very concerned this thing could cause a lot of damage to Disney World. And we're seeing a quake swarm around Salton Sea, California start to pick up again. So we've got earthquakes to the left of us, hurricanes to the right. It's almost like the universe is very, very angry with the recent behavior of the United States. Let's go to the phones. John in Barbados, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Yes, I wrote a rather acrimonious discussion with a young chap in America this morning.
Yes.
On Skype. And I was trying to sort of wake him up to the fact, that America has gone rogue, basically.
Yes. Well, the government has gone rogue. The American people, we're still the nice people we've always been.
Well, I think I'm not always sure about that because so many Americans are making excuses for these people. Like I pointed out, the Senate and the Congress are not all Mexicans. The U.S. Navy is not manned by Polish sailors. The U.S. Air Force is not made up of Luftwaffe pilots. Wall Street is not run by Hungarians. No, these are all Americans. The FBI, the CIA, these are all Americans. The police force, all Americans. And the whole system seems to be corrupt and just falling apart. I'm trying to convince some of these young American people that this is the actual case is almost impossible. That they bridle instead of discussing the facts. They've become abusive, which is ridiculous.
No, John, they're becoming defensive. Because remember, part of the propaganda mechanism is you get kids when they're very, very young, too young to understand that the big people are full of bovine excrement, and you get them to believe certain things. You get them to believe our government is good. You get them to believe that TV news is truthful. You get them to believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy and the imaginary playmate in the clouds. And as these kids get older, their personality evolves around those core beliefs, and those beliefs become part of the identity. And the giveaway is in the language. When you talk to people, they don't say, I support the Republican platform. They say, I am a Republican. I am a Christian. I am blah, blah, blah. They become that which is believed in. It's part of their identity. And when you start challenging those core beliefs past a certain point, the mind interprets it as a personal attack on them, and they're going to get defensive. And that's why you have to be very, very careful when you're talking to people about what's going on. You have to be very, very gentle. The fine art of being a rabble-rouser is understanding what the rabble is ready to listen to and what they are not.
The art of the possible. Yes. I was trying to make sensible explanations, that these young people should do their own due diligence and own thinking, not let the mainstream correspondents tell them how to think.
Well, that would definitely be something I think the parents should be doing, but, ever since the 1990s and feminism, most families are now two working parents, and the kids are being raised by the TV set, which is going to say, don't think, don't question, don't analyze, just believe what we tell you to believe. And you look at Common Core, the educational system is doing exactly the same thing. They're not teaching these kids how to think, how to analyze. It's all about belief in global warming, belief that the government is good, and it's deliberately done to create a population that's easy to control and dominate. And when the final revelation comes, something that happens that's so obvious the American people can't deny it anymore, it's going to literally be a psychic shock for a lot of people. And people are going to be wandering around like, wow, I don't even know who I am anymore.
Well, I was trying to make, show examples of, the different psychology. I brought up the example of the Brexit vote, which basically kicked the UK establishment up the rectum. They were so convinced that they were going to remain in the EU, and they got the boot up the backside.
Yeah, despite all the fraud. And that's something that all the Trump supporters need to remember. Vote fraud is not immutable because there was a lot of fraud going on in the Brexit election, and the British people simply overcame that. Now, John, stay on the line here. We've got another caller who apparently has a quote for you. Can we bring up Pat in Vermont at the same time we have John? Okay, Pat, are you there?
Sure am. Aloha, Michael.
Aloha.
Thank you, John. I had the same feeling probably years ago. I'm not quite sure when I wrote this, but one sentence sums it up. When liars lead, only cowards, accomplices, and the feeble-minded follow.
I like
all I have
that.
to say for the moment.
And that's original with you?
Yes, sir.
I want you to mail that into me. I want to put that in the permanent quotes file at the website.
I'll be happy to. John,
I approve of that statement.
Michael, for yours as well, sir.
All right. Well, thank you very much there. Pat, if you have nothing else, we're going to let you go here. And John, we're running out of time, and I've got one more phone call I need to get to. So we're going to say goodbye to you as well and switch over to Aaron in Minnesota. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Aaron, are you there?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, good. So what's on your mind?
I've seen your show on Ron Gibson's page on YouTube a couple of times, and I agree with everything that you say, basically. And I just wanted to share some information about perpetual motion technology. I've been doing a lot of research on the internet. And, basically, if you take rare earth magnets and align them in sequence so that one repels. So a north magnet repels a north magnet, and then you have another one right next to it that is aligned
Pat, you must be a graduate of Common Core. You need to go back and take a physics course to understand the fallacy of perpetual motion machines. All right, thanks a lot. We're going to let you go, and no more calls for the rest of the show, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And last segment of our program, I wanted to share something with you. Not too long ago, I had mentioned that we had a new arrival in our family. And one of our listeners, I know if you're not watching on BAM User, you can't see it, but crocheted up this little clown with a T on the front for Donald Trump as a gift for the new little person, and we will be forwarding that along to them. So thank you very much. It was very kind of you to do. Okay, now then, you would think after all the scandal, the VA would get their act together, but according to an article out of the Washington Times, veterans are still dying while waiting for care over at the Phoenix VA. And it's still improperly canceling veterans' appointments. It has a huge backlog of cases. This has been going on for 2 years. What have they done? Well, they've promised us they were going to fix the situation. They've spent a lot of time and energy and money in the corporate media saying, oh, yes, we know it's a problem, but we're working to fix it, but it doesn't seem to happen. And finally, I love this story. Okay? This is coming out of healthcarepublic.info. The CDC has been forced to release documents showing that they have known all along thimerosal, the mercury-based preservative, does lead to neurological problems, meaning autism. They have known all along. Now, by the way, the FDA established a deadline for 2 years after 1999 when thimerosal was banned, said you have 2 years to get it out of your vaccines. It is still in 60% of flu vaccines being handed out to malls right now. And we have this incredible epidemic of autism. And I'm sure over at the corporate media right now they're saying, you know, it's hard enough dealing with those wacko tinfoil hat wearing wingnut independent media conspiracy theorists if they weren't turning out to be right all the time. And at the risk of sounding like I'm gloating, yeah, we were. The CDC lied to you. They knew there was a problem. They ginned up that one report that they made public saying there's no link, and one of the authors of that report has come on out and said it was a fraud. They cherry-picked the data to get the result they wanted. So the CDC knowingly lied to you. The corporate media that said there's no link between thimerosal and vaccines, they lied to you. I think every single parent of an autistic child who had their mandatory childhood vaccines has a class action lawsuit that sweeps across the entire corporate media and the entire medical industrial complex, including the federal government itself. Now, unfortunately, when the Homeland Security Act was passed, the U.S. government indemnified the vaccine makers. You're not allowed to sue them. You have to go to the vaccine injury court. And if they find you've been harmed by vaccines, they'll take more money from the taxpayers to pay for your child's medical care. But most times they say, no, it's not proven, not proven, not proven, not proven. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here. I got a bunch of stuff to do this afternoon. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. You are all part of the independent media now. Take what you learn here, take what you find on WhatReallyHappened.com, and you share it with everybody that you know. We're in a fight for the future of our nation and our world. Talk to you tomorrow. Aloha, America.